Coming up in today's episode of the Elmore Leonard podcast, we have the one and only Dennis Lehane. Dennis is a best-selling and Edgar-award winning author of over a dozen books, including A Drink Before the War, World Gone By, and most recently, Small Mercies. Films based on his work include Mystic River, directed by Clint Eastwood, Gone Baby Gone and Live by Night, both directed by Ben Affleck, Shutter Island, directed by Martin Scorsese, and The Drop, which Dennis wrote the screenplay for and which was directed by Michael Roskam. In our conversation today, he shares some of what he learned from Elmore, what he likes about working in television, what makes Boston Boston, and so much more. Please enjoy the great Dennis Lehane. We are super excited to have Dennis Lehane here on the Elmore Leonard podcast. We normally don't start shows with blurbs, but since the blurb is from Elmore and it's about you, I thought we would get Dennis Lehane's Mystic River. Boy, does he know how to write. Not too shabby.
Yeah. That was very big honor. Some of your childhood dreams come true right there.
So were you a fan of Elmore's, forever? How did you first come across his work, and what was the one? Everyone has a different Elmore novel that grabbed him and then made you want to...
Well, for me it was Stick. I was working in a bookstore, and they did kind of the beginning of the push on Elmore Leonard. I can say this as a former bookstore person, began with Stick. And then it was Stick, La Brava, and then they went big on Glitz. And so if you were tracking the guy's career, that's when it was the big... Delacourt came out with, or Dell came out with reissues of a bunch of his books. And they, do you know what a dump is in terms of a bookstore?
No.
Okay. It's what they call those displays, those cardboard displays that they put up in the front of a bookstore. That's called a dump.
Oh,
and
okay.
I don't know why.
Is it good or bad to be...
It's good to be in a dump. You get your own dump, you've made it, my man. So they put right... just before Glitz, I think. I'm not 100%, but it was around Glitz time that they did a dump of 9 of his titles. They reissued 9 of his titles in these really nice looking...
Were these the Chip Kid?
These were not the Chip Kids. I don't think these were the Chip Kids. This would have been around 85, yeah. And they released a whole bunch of his titles. So it was, I can tell you, there was Stick, and there was La Brava, and there was 52 Pickup, and Split Images, and Unknown Man number 89, which is still my favorite.
Really?
And so, yeah, I love Unknown Man number 89. I love that freaking book.
So, 2 questions.
Yeah.
2 questions. So you said Stick, but not Swag.
Swag is Swag was reprinted later than Stick. And Swag
they
is
didn't
still...
have it at the bookstore?
I love Swag. No, not at the time. They came out, I think, a few months later, the reprint. Swag is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah.
It's a hilarious book, and then it ends with, one of the great ending lines of all time, just shut the fuck up, will you, Frank?
It's perfect.
Yeah, I was...
But also, and you like Unknown Man 89, and what about Big Bounce? Were you into that as well?
Big Bounce was not... Big Bounce came later for me. There was the Miami books. This is when he was really starting to do a lot of Miami stuff. And then what I found really interesting was the Detroit, what would happen when he wrote about Detroit.
Yeah.
It took the books to a different level. So the Florida stuff is very atmospheric and very very funny. Mm-hmm. But then there's this thing that happens, the same thing that happens to me when I read about Boston. There was a richness that came out of the Detroit stuff. Right. It was a guy who knew it in his bones. He knew Detroit in his bones.
You mentioned that. I wanted to ask you about writing about Boston. So, at what point in your process, and if Elmore was here to ask him the same question, do you decide that it is a Boston story? Does it start off that way, or is it once you're...
Yeah.
Okay.
I've only written one book that was not set in Boston, and that was the sequel to Live by Night, World Gone By. And after I wrote that, I said never again. If I ever write another book, it will be Boston-based. It's my wellspring, complete wellspring. Why would I go to cross somebody else's field to use their well when mine's perfectly fine?
Right.
And I think I felt what I could kind of, what people have been saying about me my entire career, before my career, back when I was a writer, a student, is something magical happens when you write about the world you grew up in. I mean, I can write about any other world, but something magic happens. And that's the way I felt about, again, with Leonard in Detroit, I always felt.
So let's talk about real quick Animal Rescue and The Drop, because the short story takes place in Boston, but the movie...
So does the novel, but not the movie. The novel I took back to Boston. I put it in Buckingham, which is the neighborhood of Mystic River. And
right.
It's a fictitious neighborhood. But the movie takes place in Brooklyn.
Was that a production thing? Because it was... Okay.
Yeah. It was the producer's decision, and they asked me to reinvent the screenplay just to be Brooklyn-based. And I was living in Brooklyn at the time, working on Boardwalk Empire, so it was pretty easy.
There you go. I think The Drop is I think it's a classic movie. And...
thank you.
No, it is... I think it's a perfect movie, and it's... too bad we did not get more of James Gandolfini. I think it's one of his last movie roles.
It is. It was the last one released. He did this one with Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Enough said. Very different from The Drop, but also a very, very good movie.
That was good. It was a beautiful movie. But he was magnificent in The Drop. And The Drop was wonderful. Everybody set out to make a Sidney Lumet movie from the 70s. And what we discovered when the audience didn't show up was nobody knows. The average moviegoer has no idea what the hell a Sidney Lumet movie from the 70s is. So, but it was great for us. We made the movie we wanted to make. Everybody was on board. That was our vision, and I think we nailed it.
I think you did too. And if anybody listening hasn't seen it, definitely go see it, because it's a perfect movie. It's a movie that I will, if it comes up with somebody in conversation, I feel like I can I can load in with this person.
Oh, that's exciting.
But when did you know you wanted to turn it into a full novel? Was it always something you wanted to go back to and make a novel, or? So
it started as a novel. And then it kicked out on me. It just would not come together. But the opening chapter was what you would know as The Drop, in terms of him finding the puppy. He finds the puppy. Right. He meets the woman. That's the first chapter of this novel. So then, when I was writing the script, I just started to say, and I was opening it up, I went, oh, all right, forget everything else. What if you just wrote this in the voice of Mystic River, which is a very specific voice. The narrative voice of Mystic River is in 3 of my novels. It's The Drop, it's Small Mercies, it's Mystic River. So it's the same guy telling those stories. Mm-hmm. And so, not me, but a narrator. So I said, I missed that voice. I want to go back and do that again. And so right when I finished the script, I said to my editor at the time, I said, I was thinking, maybe I could do a real novel of The Drop, of what was then Animal Rescue. And she said, that would be nice. So we did it. It's so funny because that book, obviously it was a novelization of a tiny little movie that nobody saw, and but it has now become a thing. It's had a really great life afterwards. It's probably my least well-known novel, and the sort of thing that is a secret pride for me is me and a few other people whose opinions I really respect, we all agree it's one of my best books. It's without a doubt in the top, in my opinion, the top 3. And so I'm very fond of it. I'm like, hey, I did it. Where most of my books I'm kind of like, I want that back. But
really,
The Drop, yeah.
Which ones do you want back?
All of them.
Really?
Yeah, most.
You mentioned Small Mercies, and I reread that. It is a beautiful and a heartbreaking book.
Thank you.
And no, I mean it's first off, are you okay? Because that's a tough book. And
it was a purge for me. It purged a lot of stuff. It was great.
Yeah,
that was a great book to write. I know it's a brutal book to read in a lot of ways, but it was a wonderful, freeing book to write. It was getting like a 45-year weight off my chest. It was amazing.
It's unbelievable. Like, do you ever feel that you are, when you're writing about Boston, that it's a limitation in any way? Like it is because there's something you want to do, but if you do it, it won't be a real Boston story or not a real Boston.
That's what I have screenplays for, and that's what I have TV shows for. And I just feel like now that I've expanded pretty dramatically into that space, I just feel like if I write another novel, and I'm not sure I will, but if I do, I want it to be in that world. I want it to be in the world I grew up in. That's my...
If you write another novel?
Yeah, I mean, when I wrote Small Mercies, it came pouring out of me after several failed attempts at novels. I'd written I abandoned 2 novels in between Since We Fell and Small Mercies. And novels had been getting harder and harder for me to write, exponentially, each time I wrote one. And so as I expanded into this space where I was doing television and loving it, running television shows, it's a very social thing, and I'm kind of a social guy. When I had the experience of writing Small Mercies, which came out at a very inconvenient time, it was never something ideal time to write that book. I was literally running a television show that was falling apart in every way, shape, and form. Well, I said, this is why I became a writer in the first place, because I couldn't control it. You know, I couldn't not write. And that's the only reason to write a novel, is for me. I just said, from this point on, if another idea seizes me the same way, and it has to come out, then I will write another novel. But if it doesn't, I don't owe anybody a novel. I'm out of contract for the first time in my life. And
you're a free agent.
I'm a free agent. I owe nobody nothing. I don't have any of the guilt. I don't have the axe over my head of just, shit, you owe another book, you owe another book. So, yeah, I'm just going to play it by ear.
Well, I hope there's more, but
I do too.
I'm sure there will be. Do you make it a point, like if Boston is where the novels come from, how often do you go back to Boston? 'Cause
not enough, but I carry it with me. It's just one of those things. At this point, I'm not going to lose the voice. At this point, I'm not going to lose the vibe of the city.
Right.
You know, my closest friends, my buddies, my boys, they're all Boston guys. So we're constantly fucking with each other in a Boston way. And we're always, you know, it's like, I'm good. I'm mainlined in.
So we were talking, you mentioned Stick, you mentioned La Brava, you mentioned Unknown Man 89, which is Stick, which is the sequel to Swag, Unknown Man, which is the sequel to Big Bounce, and Glitz. And I forgot to ask you this. What bookstore did you work at? Is it still around?
I worked at a Walden Books, downtown
nice.
Boston. Downtown Crossing, Boston. Yeah, it was so cool. They put it aside for me. Glitz, the first ARE I ever had in my life was Glitz, and my bookstore manager saw it come in and put it aside for me.
I'm sorry, ARE?
Advanced Reader's Edition. What they call galleys or AREs or ARCs.
Nice.
And it was really strange where the author photo was on this book. It was Snoopy at a typewriter. It was intense. It was pretty cool. And that was Glitz. And I read Glitz. I think I read it the day I got it. I can still remember that first scene. You know.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Was there anything in particular about, and I hate to use the word, style when talking about a novelist, was there something about just Elmore's writing in general that you really latched onto that you tried ever to emulate, or was it just something like, this is awesome, that's his thing, I'm going to do my own thing?
Well, Elmore and I met a couple times, and we talked very much about dialogue, about having been born with an ear. You don't write like he does, or me, or Richard Price, for example, unless you were born hearing dialogue in a different way, I think, than most people do. You hear speech differently than most people do. And what he did, he took the dialogue, the syntax of the dialogue of the characters, and he wove it into the prose narrative. Mm-hmm. So his sentences were constructed sometimes like dialogue, it's what did Martin Amis? Martin Amis said it was like its own tense. Elmore Leonard created his own tense. You'd have to look it up, but
yeah, Martin Amis was a huge fan of Elmore's, and he described Elmore's use of the present participle. I think he called it the marijuana tense because of how Elmore would use it to play with time.
Yeah, and so it was I loved that, and I think I did use a little of that. I still use a little of that in my work. And then the other thing I know for sure I've always credited him with is how he depicts violence was so true to me. It was so 100% true to how I saw violence growing up.
Yeah.
That I've always tried to emulate that. There's no slow motion violence in Elmore Leonard. Elmore Leonard just boom, violence happens. It's like super fast, and it for me, violence, having grown up in a pretty violent place, violence was something that always seemed to happen like birds bursting from a blind, like it happened like just out of the corner of your eye before you knew it was happening, and by the time you computed it was happening, half the time it was too late to do anything about it, and half the time it was already over. Right. And I think Elmore did that. He did that so much in his books. His violence was always, it was unadorned, it was unromanticized, it was unstylized. It just, bang, it was ugly, it was violence. And that's what I loved about it. I took that from him.
We recently did, the last episode that we posted was actually Ombre, which, the Western. And there's a couple of moments of violence in there that they just come out of nowhere. And it is... and that book is 60-something years old, and I think it was 61 that it was written.
Sheesh.
And it just hits you.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, and if you've talked about this to the point where you don't want to talk about it anymore, then we can just skip it. But did you want to be a novelist when you were you an aspiring novelist? Were you writing when you were at Walden Books?
I was trying to figure it out. It was the beginning of my apprenticeship as a writer. As a self-taught. I was self-taught for about a year and a half. When I was working at Walden Books, I was reading with this crazy hunger, because I was like, I think I want to do this. At that point, I had written a novel when I was 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
Literally. And so some part of me thought, I might want to do this, but it was not considered a viable career option where I grew up. So... Yeah, I had to drop out of 2 colleges before I committed. And it was during that time I was at Walden's, I started to read a lot of short fiction, a lot of Raymond Carver, a lot of Chekhov, a lot of... I read Elmore Leonard. Back then, once his reprints were coming out, there was still a shitload of books that had not come out, that were out of print. Yeah. And I would go... Boston was a great bookstore city back then. Yeah. And I would just go find them in used bookstores. So I would hunt used bookstores. I would go to Harvard Square. I would go to the Brattle Book Shop. I would go wherever I could go to find whatever Elmore Leonard I didn't have. And so I was doing that. And then when I was 20, I went off to major in creative writing, and I went down south to do it. And it was clear that who my influences were. Your influences are very clear early on because you're just stealing from your masters. So I wrote Richard Price had a baby with Raymond Carver, who had a baby with Elmore Leonard, who had a baby with maybe Alexander Dumas. I just had this real... You could see where my influences were back then. And Leonard had just really exploded at that point. That was the big... He became Elmore Leonard in the sort of mid to late 80s. And I remember by the time I got into graduate school, there was a lot of arguments about, the type of intellectual arguments you have in Ivy Towers about what his place in literature was, because he was the rock star at that point.
Yeah, we had a conversation with Michael Siegel, who was his manager for film and television for 20 plus years, and he admitted he didn't know much about Elmore, and he was working for H.N. Swanson Swanee, who was sort of he was 80-something, representing Elmore when Michael started working for him as a younger guy and as an assistant. And then he started representing him without really being a fan. But it was people like Martin Amis and I believe Joyce Carol Oates who were saying positive things about him that really got him to, oh my God, this guy's legit. And that was one of his managers, which is a crazy thing. But it was Michael who helped get, there were a lot of adaptations being made of Elmore's work in the 80s that I think up until, a lot of them were made for TV movies.
Glitz was a made for TV movie?
Glitz was a made for TV movie. I think Pronto was. I believe Cat Chaser was.
No, it was not. No, it was straight to video, but it was not made for TV. Abel Ferrara directed Cat Chaser with Peter Weller and Kelly McGillis. It's terrible, but they made it.
They sure did. So if you had to choose, here's an easy question for you. Who's the best director of Dennis Lehane adaptations? Is it Scorsese, Eastwood, or Ben Affleck?
Can't do it.
Does it rhyme with Scorsese?
Can't do it. I cannot, without insulting one of the others, say which is my favorite or whatever.
Those are all great movies. So yeah, no, it's
We've
all
been
good.
okay. We've been okay. I got treated better than Elmore did for sure.
Although
Elmore had Out of Sight and Get Shorty.
And Jackie Brown and Justified and many others over the years, but yeah, no, not all of them were winners, as we often talk about on the podcast. Now, on the internet, it says that you wrote and directed a movie in the mid-90s. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you wrote and directed a movie, but you've been a showrunner on TV, but you don't. It doesn't seem like you're directing any TV now. I'm curious about that.
Well, there's a possibility I'm going to. It was some discussions right now, but when you're the showrunner, you have all the benefits and none of the pain in the ass of directing. I mean, you cast,
yeah.
So you're in charge of that. You're going to have a series of tone meetings with the art department, production design, everybody to tell them what the show looks like. So I mean, it's a question of, do you really need to do it? Do you really need to direct? And I'm considering directing something only because I want to put my stamp fully on the aesthetic look of the show, and that's the only way I would. But otherwise, it's not something I really need to do. The one thing, when I made my little indie 30 years ago, it taught me that I was capable at it. I wouldn't say I was great. I was capable. And I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I love writing, and I love show running, and I love working with actors, but I don't necessarily want to work with them through 9 takes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a lot.
And then let's try it again, and then we got to set it up again, and then turn around the camera, and all of that, which is the nuts and bolts of it. It's not a glamorous job. So I think because I cultivate very strong and rich relationships with my actors on my shows. Like, to this day, there's nobody I've worked with on a show who I have a bad relationship with as an actor. I think they feel comfortable knowing that if they're not getting what they need out of the director, they call me and they just say, hey, what do you think? Oh, not undermining the director, but what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? Or what were you thinking when you did this? Or where do you want me to go here? And it works out. And I work with directors who are pretty collaborative. So I'm there as a stopgap. I'm like the catcher in a baseball game. I'm there to
yeah.
So
you're
manage the game.
But was that always so when you made that movie, were you at Walden Books at the time? Was that
Oh no, that was way past then. It was after grad school. I'd gotten money from my first book. I never had money in my life. It wasn't that much money. And I said, I'm going to make a movie with this, forgetting that I would have to pay taxes on that money. So that was a real fun couple of years. But no, I did it. It was something I always wanted to do. I'm a movie fanatic. And I think, until I met Martin Scorsese, I'd never met anybody who'd seen more movies than me, period. Never.
Right.
So, and if I'd grown up, I think in a different economic circumstance, I might have just skipped the whole book writing and gone right into filmmaking. It's possible. But again, if you don't think writing was on the table, believe me, filmmaking sure as shit wasn't. My father would have been like, what? You want to buy a what? A camera? Okay. Well, good luck with that.
But so when you wrote a novel at 15, I mean, that's an undertaking for anybody, let alone a 15-year-old. Did he do that in secret?
No.
How did that come
People
about?
know I was doing it. I feel like it took about 7 months, I want to say. It wasn't a good book. It wasn't very good at all, but
What was it about?
I don't remember everything. It was about a cop, and there was a serial killer, and it was a big finale at Castle Island, which clearly I wanted to do again because that's what ends Small Mercies.
Yeah.
I don't remember much else about it, but
Oh, man.
it was.
When one day, like all great authors, you place your paper somewhere, will it be in the collection?
No, because I know one person who has a copy, but I wrote it on a typewriter and made a couple of copies of Copy Cop, which existed back then, and I have this really old friend who I have not been in contact with, I don't think, in about 10 years. But the last time she was in contact with me, she said, "You know what I have in my basement?" And I was like, "Ooh." So, no, I hope to God it never shows up in anybody's papers. I'm not the guy who wants my stuff showing warts and all, man. That's not my jam.
Well, we had a fun little thing so there's a biography of Elmore coming out, and the biographer, it's I think comes out in June, and Chad or CM Cushions, who wrote it, when he was 15, he wrote a short story that was rejected by Alfred Hitchcock magazine or something like that, and he wrote to Elmore for advice, and Elmore wrote him back and actually included a manuscript of a short story he had written with notes from his editor. And
Wow.
And Chad, when Elmore's work gets at the University of South Carolina, when they publish sort of like online, this is the catalog, Chad is a big fan, and he saw like his own name on the catalog, and so Elmore had kept it or had been in.
Oh my goodness!
And so it was just like this,
Wow.
So when you watch another Boston set film, it's not that has nothing to do with you. Do you lean in further than you would on a regular movie, or?
Well, you're looking for the locations. You're looking for places You're getting excited about that stuff. Like, I have a lot of fun with that. And there's a lot of ones that really... But Bostonians love their city. They're batshit. And they all have these... There's a great Seth Meyers fake promo for a movie called The Boston Movie. It was on the Seth Meyers show. It's really funny. And it gets into the fact that everybody from Boston is obsessed with where everybody comes from and how to get there. And, so when I watch, The Friends of Eddie Coyle or The Town.
Sure.
Those are, I mean, I was so jealous of The Town because I was like, damn, you shot a car chase in the North End. I mean, that's impossible. And they'll never allow it again. They were so screwed by that car chase. Traffic was so screwed in the North End that they said they'll never allow anybody to shoot there again. And I was so jealous. And it was right around the corner from an apartment I once had. So I love stuff like that. Or like every single person in Boston who's grew up in the noir world, if you will. When is something going to be set at Boston Sand and Gravel? It's in The Town. It ended up in The Town. Right? Ben probably had the exact same feeling. One day I'm going to shoot at Boston Sand and Gravel. And he did.
Right.
It was great.
Yeah.
So, I get stuff like that. I get excited by stuff like that. The only thing you want them to get right, obviously, is either don't do the accent or do it right. I mean, and that's really hard. It's extremely hard.
Who does the worst Boston accent?
Worst?
Yeah. You don't have to answer that.
There's some really bad ones out there. There's some ones that hurt. They really, they hurt the ear. And then there's some great ones. I think, The Departed, because they had Matt Damon and Mark Wahlberg, it sounds almost uniformly good, except for Martin Sheen's, which Martin Sheen has been doing the same Boston accent forever, and it's not an accent. I don't know where he got it. I think he got it from when he was playing one of the Kennedys, and then he's just extended it. And so, like, nobody says co-op like he says. And I would say The Departed probably, and there's a little-known movie called Monument Ave with Dennis Leary that has excellent accents.
So that's the thing, the accent.
Yeah, that's the thing that's going to throw you. Everything else I feel is acceptable. Like, I find it funny, like, there was a bomb movie from the 90s called Blown Away with Jeff Bridges and Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
And
Tommy Lee Jones he's in the IRA.
IRA bomber, and Jeff Bridges is, And there's a moment in the movie where Jeff Bridges gets a call that he has to race to save somebody on the other. I can't remember, his daughter or something. I can't remember what it was. But he takes off from Copley Square, and then he drives over the bridge into Cambridge, and then he turns around, he drives back over the exact same bridge out of Cambridge, and then he goes past Copley Square to end up in the South End, which is right beside Copley Square. So he basically drove across the city to come back to the exact same place. I find stuff like that amusing. I just think it's fun. It's not like I'm going to sit there and say, "Oh, how dare you play with our geography."
Does the dinner table scene in The Heat, where everyone is going around, I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but
100%. 100%. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Oh, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. Melissa McCarthy in that movie is pure Boston. She's outstanding.
She's wonderful. I want to ask you, when you're adapting someone else's work, I believe Blackbird is based on a nonfiction book, and then you've done
three Stephen
Kings. Mr. Mercedes, Outsider, and To Watch. So first off, are you guys friends after all these adaptations?
We've been acquaintances for years and years, is how I'd put it. He gave me a wonderful, he changed my career. He gave me a headline, the first line of a New York Times Sunday book review front page, started with the novels of Dennis Lehane and J.K. Rowling, got me through a terrible summer after his accident.
Wow,
it changed my career, and I reached out to him and to say thank you, and we've crossed paths over the years. I think Friends is pushing it, but we are definitely very good acquaintances with. We write each other. He sends me a book. Every time his new books come out, he sends me an autographed copy. I do the same. He's a class act, and he's just a great, great guy. And he's a great benefactor of writers. He is a big, big believer in supporting other writers, which I love about him.
I had a conversation with Charles Ardai, who publishes the Hard Case Crime books, and he wrote to Stephen King asking if he would do a blurb. And a few months later, he got word back saying no, but he'll write a book. And that's pretty much what, made that label still, there's still an action. And,
exactly.
And those are great books. No,
those are wonderful. And he's just a... Whew. So with what happened with... when I took over Mr. Mercedes, David Kelly, we were working on Mr. Mercedes, and then David said, "Look, I'm getting pulled over onto this Big Little Lies thing. Can you just take this thing from here? Just run with it."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Sure." And then I wrote to Steve, and I said, "Look, I'm taking over Mr. Mercedes. I won't be sharing anything from this point on because I have to do my thing the way I do my thing, because creatively." I said, "But I promise you, I will be true to the spirit of your book." And that's all you want. You don't want somebody who's going to do everything that was in your book, because some things work cinematically and some things don't. The ending of God May Be Gone, the book, is very different than the ending of God May Be Gone, the movie. Yeah. And the ending of the movie is wonderful.
Right.
It's cinematic. Whereas the end of the book is a guy sitting in a playground thinking. And you can't shoot that. So there has to be differences. So when I did Mr. Mercedes, I felt I'm going to be taking liberties, but I'm going to stay true to the spirit of the book. And I did. Mm-hmm. And I did the same thing when I did End of Watch. And then at the end of the process of doing End of Watch, which was not necessarily pleasant for a multitude of reasons, I left. I stopped. Mm-hmm. And they did a third season of Mr. Mercedes without me. And then with The Outsider, it was Richard. I mean, that was Richard's. I was brought in to support Richard, and that's what I did. But the law is, will the author look at his stuff and feel betrayed? And that, to me, is the law. That's it. And if I walk that line, and even though I change things, I feel like the author should be able to look at any of his work and go, there it is. That's it. That's the heart of it. If you look at In With the Devil, which is the basis of Blackbird, the stuff that I pulled out of that is not it. There's stuff that is not in the book at all. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about event. I'm talking about a character arc. which is my story, is the story of a man who discovers that he's got some major issues with women. And it's through this journey that he discovers, what's the misogyny? Where am I on the line of misogyny? Right? That's the journey that he goes on. Obviously, Larry Hall is at the top of that mountain.
Yeah.
Where's Jimmy fall? The real Jimmy did not. That was not Jimmy's deal at all. Yeah. But I wanted to tell a story. The events are all the same. Everything that happened in the book is, everything that happens in the show is pretty much in the book.
I think one of the things that's really fun about From Afar, like having a sense of all the different things that you're doing, but so you've obviously written over a dozen novels, and you're doing more and more in television, but you're a showrunner as well as a staff writer, and or at this point, are you only now being a showrunner? Would you ever?
Oh no! I could never not be a staff writer. No. I'm a writer.
But when you're working with someone as a showrunner, when you're essentially in charge of everything, and then you're not in that seat, but you're still on the show, do you feel like you have to make any adjustments, or what is that process like with Richard Price on The Outsider, where he's running the show?
Well, with Richard, I was there just to provide support. That's my job. That's it. I'm not a showrunner here. I'm just a writer. With my current writing team, which is a really small team, we're a really tight unit. I have one chief writer, and she's the only writer I've ever in my career trusted completely, 100%. I'll just say, you take it, you do it. Or like when she was on set, she'd call and she'd just be like, "Oh, there's a problem. We'll rewrite it, just do it."
Yeah.
And okay. And her name's Molly Miller, and she's an absolute ace. And the two of us would write scenes. It doesn't matter who gets credited; nobody gives a shit in my world. But we would write scenes in each other's episodes, literally within the scenes. So there are scenes that will show up in my next show, Smoke, that were written line by line by two writers. Like Molly would write one line, I'd write the next line. She'd write the next line, I'd write the next line. She'd write the next line, I'd write the next line. And the running joke on set was every time one of us would be complimented for a line, it was the other person's line. So like somebody came up to me on set and said, where do you come up with your great dialogue? And I was like, it's just something that I've had since I was a kid. And he was like the line about a mechanical appendage. And I was like, that's Molly's line, right? And then Molly was on set, and somebody said to her, this actress said to her, "I just can't believe what an incredible handle you have on women's issues." And Molly was like, "Well, I'm a woman, I'm a feminist of my time, And then the woman said, one of the greatest lines I've ever said is X. And Molly went, "Yeah, Dennis wrote that." So what I love the most about doing this is how collaborative it truly is. If you get the right people, it can be collaborative. It's not David Mamet has a line, "Film is collaboration, now bend over." It can be like that. But this is not like that. If you do it correctly, and you have people whose egos are secure, and you're in the room for the right reason, you're contributing to a whole. It's not about individual achievement when you're doing a TV show. It's just not.
Right.
It's about being part of a whole.
I've had this conversation with lots of friends of mine, especially since TV got really good.
Thank you, David Chase.
David Chase.
That's when it started, in my opinion. It was Chase.
I would say Sopranos, but I would go back to first two seasons of Twin Peaks. I thought were
you can look if you really want to go back. You want to push.
Hill Street Blues.
Hill Street Blues. It's Hill Street Blues. It's Stephen Bochco, Hill Street Blues, and David Lynch. I think Tom Fontana and Paul Atanasio with Homicide. Yeah. I think those are the things that were changing TV. And then David Chase just blew it wide, man.
Yeah.
He just,
Yeah.
And then it was that from there on. I think the floodgate opened with the college episode of The Sopranos, the episode where he takes Meadow looking at colleges,
and he finds the guy
a
snitch
protection.
Yeah. But do you feel like you're able to say everything you want to say in a television show that you're able to say in a novel.
You can do so much. I mean, you can't do the interior monologue. So I mean, you can't just write a sentence and just go, "Damn, that one's gonna live forever." Like that's a great feeling, you know. But there's so many things you can do in a show that you can't do. I've gotten more and more minimalist as a screenwriter, because I now know the power of what an actor can do with a look, what an actor can do with just a couple of lines of dialogue, like as opposed to a paragraph, you know? Mm-hmm. So now I'm doing the adaptation of Small Mercies, and I am just like taking a blowtorch to that novel. I mean, in terms of the density of it, like it's just like a conversation that in the novel is 8 pages is basically about a page and a half on screen.
Is that what are you thinking about directing Small Mercies?
That's what I'm thinking about, maybe directing a couple episodes. So because I just have a very strong template in my head of what I want it to look like. Right. And no matter how many times I talk to people about this, I don't think they totally get it. So that's part of me says that if Apple lets me direct, then I'll probably direct.
Why wouldn't they? So, like, come on.
Well, because it's a lot to run a show and direct when you've never directed outside of an indie movie you made 30 years ago. So,
Well, is it available? Maybe give them the exclusive license to, and we're talking about Neighborhoods, is that correct?
Yeah. No, it's not available, and it's very dated, and yeah. So.
All right. Well, maybe that's the sweetener. You give them an exclusive 30-day window.
I've got plans. Don't you worry. I got plans, Judd.
All right. Well, it's tax time, so I just, I'm full of good schemes. Yeah. Can I ask, like, how far along you are in that process? Is that something that will be shot in the next year or so? Or?
Oh no, we're waiting on a green light. So there's a couple of scripts, and we're talking to some people at a casting level, and we're just seeing if we can package it correctly, and then we'll see. So.
Well, it's an amazing book, and
thank you.
If a book or any story can manage one gut punch, it's impressive, and it's there's a lot of them, and it's ultimately, I think it's a beautiful story.
Thank you.
Thanks for writing.
It's funny because one of the things, to bring it all home here, one of the things you do when you're trying to convey what you want is you create what's known as a lookbook, and a lookbook is just you pull images and say, this is what it is. This is what I want this thing to look like. And one of the films that I pulled a bunch of images from is the Detroit section of Out of Sight, which is really rich and vivid, and the way he shoots that is just so beautiful. And looks completely different than the Florida stuff. I mean, it's the perfect Elmore Leonard adaptation, in my opinion. I said that to Elmore, and he said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." And he was like, "I don't know." And he said, "It's okay, but I don't know." And I was like, "Elmore, it's perfect. It's as good as you're ever gonna get."
For me, it's Out of Sight, Jackie Brown, and Get Shorty, and I think they're all very different. I think for Out of Sight, and I'm actually on Wednesday, I'm going to talk to Scott Frank. And
that's great.
Yeah, I'm like,
Scott knows what a big fan I am. I've talked to him about it.
Yeah, but the movie becomes Jack Foley's movie, and the book is Karen Sisco's book. That's fair. It's a perfect movie. I mean, it's an absolute. It's an absolute.
It's so great, and just so many of the small parts, like Viola Davis and Steve Zahn and Cheadle, of course. I mean, Cheadle's, times like these, and motherfuckers been known to bitch out. Oh, it's so great. Albert Brooks, Michael Keaton in that little cameo, those great scenes with Dennis Farina. You got one that says "Undercover." It's so great.
Yeah,
I just think it's the perfect pitch. With what you get with Get Shorty, which is so wonderful, is, and Jimmy Gandolfini's in that too, is you get you get this wonderful Sonnenfeld stylization to it. It looks so different than anything else. It's almost Baroque in a way, but it doesn't yield itself to rewatch the same way that Out of Sight does. Out of Sight just has this. I think it's one of the great rewatchables. You can catch it anywhere, and you just get sucked in.
Yeah, it's a fantastic movie. just briefly, I want to go back to Boston. What is there one specific thing about that city that makes you keep going back creatively?
I think Boston, the trick to Boston for me is that everybody's just a little nuts. We're all just a little bit off. And it's
Why
one
do
of
you
the
think that is?
I don't know. I think it just is. Everybody, it's also the funniest place I've ever been. Boston and Chicago are the two funniest places I've ever been.
Yeah.
People are funny in Boston. I mean, look at how many comedians have come out of Boston. Look how many comic writers have come out of Boston. There's just something really a little off about us. And it could be the Irish influence. I don't know. But we're a couple cans short of a six-pack, in my opinion. And I mean that with great love. And I put myself in the exact same group with those people. And I don't think there's this thing about Boston. Here, I'll give you a great little Boston moment. In the North End, which is, we talked about a little bit earlier, which is the Italian enclave, there's still this feeling of you don't want to pick a fight with the wrong person because they could be mobbed up. That was always the thing. You know what I mean? You don't know if that's somebody's daughter or that's somebody's, that was always the thing. There was a mafia stronghold.
Yeah.
So the streets are super thin in the North End. I was on a street that was going into the North End, and a woman stopped her car. She blocks the entire street. She gets out of her car. She leaves the engine running, and she goes to an ATM. And people start losing their minds. They're beeping their horns. They're like, what are you... And finally she turns and she looks down the block at about 9 people who's screaming at her. And she goes, I'm not fucking moving it. And that was it. And then she finished up her business. She got in her car and she drove away. That to me is not something that I imagine happens much in Des Moines, I guess. So there's a particular attitude in Boston that's a little spiky. Don't take yourself too seriously. And the sense that God's a jokester and we're the butt of that joke. There seems to be a prevalent fatalistic, funny sense in Boston that I grew up around, at least in the neighborhoods. I'm not talking about, Beacon Hill or the places where the rich people live. I'm talking about like the neighborhoods.
Right.
And that's what I read about.
And we're glad that you do. And hopefully
Thank you.
There will be more.
Okay.
No pressure. We will wait. Dennis, this has been such a thrill for me and a real honor to have you on. Thank you so much.
I'm honored as well. I am such a fan of his work, so it's anything I can do.
I appreciate you doing this. This has been great, and getting to hear a little bit about you and your process and your work in film and TV as a showrunner is very cool stuff. So thank you for sharing all that.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing all the things when they're...
Well, our show, Smoke, will be out June 27th.
Amazing. What is it about?
We are following an arsonist and 2 arsonists, actually. And it's really a show about like fire in the most metaphorical sense, like the need that we all have to burn it all down, and it's an absolutely crazy show, and we got blessed. We have an incredible cast. We have Taron Egerton and Jurnee Smollett and Greg Kinnear and Rafe Spall and this actor Ntari Mwene, who I think is going to do for him what Blackbird did for Paul Walter Hauser.
Oh, wow.
Everybody will know him after this. It was John Leguizamo. We have a wonderful show. We're very excited about it. So.
And that's going to be, is that on Apple?
Apple TV, yeah.
Amazing. Well, look for that.
Thanks.
Look for Neighborhoods. And
No, don't look for Neighborhoods. You'll never see it. But thank you, Judd. Thank you very much.
The Elmore Leonard Podcast is produced and edited by Judd Rubin. Music by Greg Ahee. Hosted by Judd Rubin and Alex Leonard. Executive produced by Peter Leonard. Copyright 2025, Elmore Leonard Inc. Please visit us at elmoreleonardofficial.com or send us an email at hello@theelmoreleonardpodcast.com.